It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Maya Khosla. Maya is a wildlife biologist, a writer, and filmmaker focusing on forest biodiversity. In 2016, she completed a film about woodpeckers called Searching for the Gold Spot, The Wild After Wildfire. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that today. As a writer, Maya has published several poetry books and has served as the Sonoma County Poet Laureate from 2018 to 2020, bringing Sonoma's communities together through poetry and field walks after the 2017 wildfires. Her writing has also been featured in award-winning documentary films, including something called Village of Dust, City of Water, which is about the water crisis in rural India. For her work, she was named one of the 2020 Environmentalists of the Year by the Sonoma County Conservation Council. So we are very fortunate to have Maya joining us here tonight. We're so grateful. Maya, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Serena. And I'm actually still based in Sonoma County, and I want to acknowledge the Pomo tribes and many other tribes who are the stewards, still are the stewards in this area. So hi, everyone. I'm just so delighted to be here and to what a strange way we have of connecting with Zoom from across different geographies, while fieldwork tends to be so anchored in place. So my one big wish, and it's going to be continuing wish throughout this presentation, is that one day we can all meet in the wild, especially in the snag forests, which are actually among my favorite habitats. You can see here mountain bluebird feeding a young. There's 2 chicks in there that I can see, that I was seeing, and this was in the Wildfire, Plumas National Forest, several years ago. As it says here, I've had, by now over 10,000 hours of observations all over the national forests, and without a doubt, those snag forests are some of the most amazing habitat, and also more in general. The post-fire forests tend to sort of be a wake-up call for a lot of different birds. And one more thing I wanted to add, which these 2 ravens reminded me, this is Armstrong Woods, right after the 2020 Walbridge fire, west of Healdsburg. And what I wanted to think about a little bit and focus on today was, because Valentine's Day is around the corner, I wanted to focus on the very special connection and loyalty birds have to their mates. Even though, for the most part, I'm going to see 2 birds together here, and of course, a lot of you know about this, but I will sort of chime in with some of my own explanations. For example, here, this is a California quail, right after the 2017 Sonoma complex fires, and there it is. Actually, it's the label. Sorry about that label. These quails are also up to about 4,000 feet in the rimfire, part of the rimfire, Stanislaus National Forest. And although this male is alone, he's singing to his heart's calling, to his heart's delight, and probably calling to attract a female at this point. Similarly to that, the western wood pewee, I never did see the 2 together during that really strong bond that they have raising that chick. This could just about be a black and white photo if it wasn't for that little saffron gold beak wide open. You can see one chick there. And fascinatingly, of course, a lot of you who've seen nests in snag forests probably know, the second the parent leaves, that chick is folding up shop and, hunkering down, and it's as invisible as there's 3 other chicks right there in that little cup nest. And sure enough, it disappears right away. It looks like a little knob of wood with a cobweb on it. But of course, these 2 parents are super loyal to each other, and literally they were timing the feedings so that they were split seconds apart. But of course, I didn't see them together very often. One of the areas of focus are going to be blackback woodpeckers. I've watched these woodpeckers for several reasons, one of which is that I joined in 2014, I joined my first series of snag forest surveys. And it was fascinating because I would not have believed the biodiversity. I wouldn't, if I had just walked into snag forests and then, you know, living forests adjacent to them. These tend to be very patchy. So there's like a patch of high intensity fire, and then right next to it, there's moderate intensity. Half the trees are alive, or more than half of them, and then low intensity closer to the creeks or downhill. I mean, it's all mixed. But these blackback woodpeckers, of course, tend to favor the high intensity patches, where I found them over and over again. And I'm so in the years between 2014 and 2021, I've just had filmed at least 12 nests and spent hours and hours around them. So there'll be a little bit of a focus with blackbacks and their behavior and the loyalty of them to one another. Here's some evening grosbeaks, also in the rimfire, and that's a pair. And a female Williamson sapsucker in Inyo National Forest. Well, again, amazingly, I never could get the two of them together. The male and female were coming back to this one sap tree and had a full ladder, top to bottom, along the tree where they had the sap wells that they were going for. And then maybe they weren't really maintaining new ones. They were pretty much going for the existing sap wells, which it was just fascinating. Watched them for hours, but never did see them, both of them together, although it was very clear where they were going repeatedly to the nest. So both of them, of course, raising young during the late spring. So the blackback, I just want to stop here for a minute. And the blackback woodpecker has been such a favorite for me. You know, I'm sure if I spent as many hours with the sapsuckers, if I have actually spent a lot of hours with sapsuckers and a lot of other woodpeckers, but the blackback is such a, to me, keystone type of species, because first of all, it's going to create that a lot of different cavities, and then the female's just going to pick one. At this point in time, the female has picked this nest cavity, and the male is doing some clean out. What I watched a couple of summers ago in the Sequoia National Forest was that the female would go in and dig around quite loudly, knocking about inside the cavity, probably shaping it to her liking because she'd already selected it. And as soon as she flew out, the male came in to do the cleanup. And this happened. I mean, I just thought, well, maybe this is an isolated situation. And I watched it for hours and hours and hours. And then I see the same thing happening with another pair. So it was sort of this touching. And the male was so completely attentive to the female. So in other words, he must have been somewhere pretty close by, because when the female came out of the cavity, he sort of jumped to attention and come right back into the cavity and do all this cleanup. And then, you know, so he's hammering, you know, spitting out the sawdust. And the minute she comes, you know, off he goes and stands to the side while she does her little business shaping the nest cavity. And this was just so fascinating that she was sort of doing her part to make herself comfortable, and then he was doing all the cleanup. Of course, blackback woodpeckers, I've seen them go for bark beetles and even on the ground for ants, but the favorite, I'm sure the biggest bang for the buck, is the wood boring beetle larvae. And there he is, he's honed in and he's grabbed one. Just a note about the snag forest as a reminder, this is one of the forests close to the Tuolumne River, North Fork of the Tuolumne. And, you know, it's really us who in some ways could have more of a reciprocal relationship with the powers that be there's a lot of misunderstanding around these snag forests. They don't grow back. There's no conifers. They're going to crash on someone. And the fact is that they are, I'll get to a little bit later, some of the mammals, because I've sort of transitioned into being fascinated with the support system for mammals here, and their nests, their food, and I've even seen Pacific fishers, digging around for grub in the logs, fallen logs that are sort of slowly decomposing into soil. So it's really amazing. And then their paths, their viewing stations, their flirting places, so where foxes are hanging out together, pairs. So it's so fascinating that us calling or even having the perception of them as garbage there's this reciprocity where, oh, we'll get rid of your garbage for you, so then they get to be cleared. And of course the animals are just using them all the time, and that's just been fascinating to me. So always have the hope whenever I'm talking to people, is like, well, if you put in a good word for the snag forests, that's putting in a good word for a lot of animals. This particular one area of the rimfire was cleared, so that's what reminded me.
And Maya, before you
here's a little chick. Yes.
We had a couple of people ask if you can describe what a snag forest is, and I thought it would be.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so there's a few types of forest things that happen after fire. After fire, some patches, it's a patchwork quilt in a way. If you look right after fire, I know this is going to be a little long answer, but if you look right after fire, like if I flew right over the rimfire, which I did, right after it was over, I saw just blackened landscape. Well, I come back a year later, which is what USGS tends to do with an aerial survey 1 year post-fire, and you'll see, oh, no, it's not all black. There's a big patch of green here and another patch of green here. And then this part is more a blackened landscape. So snag forests, the snag is a standing dead tree. This little baby chick is in a standing dead tree. They're just so easy to build in. They're hardwood at the core. Their outer layer is crispy charcoal. And then eventually that charcoal sort of flakes off, so the trees kind of look white, but they're still snags, standing dead trees. And then so easy to dig into that the blackback woodpecker and multiple other woodpeckers, after fire, they just zoom right in and boom, they're building their homes, and then they're getting their food with the wood boring beetle larvae. So I mentioned the green patches. So the green's sort of divided into two. There's like almost fully green, which is low intensity burn area where most of the trees are alive, like 75% or more. And then there's moderate intensity burn where it's about 50-50 or a little bit more than 50% of the trees are alive. And then there's high intensity burn, which are called snag forests, which is like a lot of the trees are standing dead trees. And a few of them, like maybe 25% or less, are alive. But these are stands of, they look like sort of stands of giant ship masts, like that are, on land. And they attract so much life. They're just, when these chicks get to this stage, I often have earplugs because I'm spending a long time just looking at the male coming in and the female coming in and doing the little switcheroos for feeding. And the chicks are loud. The forest is loud. The snag forests are just fascinatingly, chirpy, loud. Here's a chick that's about to get out. This is a different forest. This is a rimfire where I've worked a lot. And in this case, I never saw the female. Sad to say, blackbacks, when they land on anything other than black, you can imagine they're not camouflaged. So she might have been picked off. I don't know, but I did never see the female. But this male loyally brought the chicks to their grand finale when they flew out, and I watched them for a long time. So here's what happens when a blackback woodpecker ends up in a snag that's sort of, you can see it's sort of polished up looking. It's a lodgepole pine, and he built his nest here, and he was a very strong drummer. They have this drumming sound that they'll make when they're being territorial. Now, if they make too much and they get too visible, then some predator is going to be attracted, especially if it's, iridescent black on bright yellow, as is this case. And this was a nest failure. I did document this as a nest failure. So I'm not sure, obviously I'd have to document 20, and it's a lot of field work to try to figure it out. Is camouflage playing a role? But intuitively, you would imagine, I've seen a lot of success in the, charcoal forests with blackbacks and, hairy woodpeckers that also have a blackback, and Williamson sapsuckers, a lot of different birds using those because they have that cryptic back. And I just haven't seen enough of these bright snags to know whether they'll always be failures, but intuitively it seems like they probably would because of that. Look at that contrast, And here's not as much of a contrast, but this is actually really close to a snag forest, and that's the dad. That's in the middle. That's the dad, and this is also, to me, the continuing part of the love story, because the male and female are just so faithful to each other. There's 2 chicks coming out. The female might be with a 3rd chick, because a lot of times I've seen like 3 or 4 when the going's good and there's a lot of food. So in this case, he's feeding the female. The male is to our right, looking on, getting all mad. And right after the chick gets fed to the left, the male goes up, flies up to the female and gets all mad at her and flushes her away, and she takes off. So, at least she has a chunk of food in her tummy when she has to get flushed off. Whiteheaded woodpeckers are also one of my favorites in the snag forest. They build a little differently. I have seen whiteheaded woodpecker nests get attacked by bear, and there were no chicks left. It was a shallow nest. I don't know if they all do this, but a lot of them I've seen just build much more shallow. The blackbacks are strong. They have just the stronger beaks, and so they go deeper in. And then these guys, the whiteheadeds, it was a slightly shallow little cave in there in the tree. And of course, one of my favorites, flicker. That's interesting because it'll open up an existing cavity and make it a bit larger. And then, it's almost like very recently I heard that then a pileated will make it even larger. And guess what? Pacific fishers, flying squirrels, other squirrels, ground squirrels can actually get in there and call it home for a while. So, I mean, all these unused cavities, once they're sort of discarded, once the nesting season's done, they get used by a tremendous number of other. I just learned about the Pacific fisher very recently. And here's the little nuthatches, and that little chick is getting ready to spring out of the nest, very active. There's 2 others behind the chick that are not quite as active, and probably not as fed as much when the chick gets bigger and stronger, and then it gets the food first. So it's going to fly out first. In fact, it flew out just a few hours after I took this shot. By the way, I have to say a lot of these are stills from footage. So I'm pretty much rolling my camera for behavior most of the time, and because that's my main interest. And so these are not, none of these are stills. Western bluebird, using either a black-backed or a hairy woodpecker discarded nest cavity that's actually right behind it. It's sort of blocking the view and checking me out at the same time. And here's another mountain bluebird. This bluebird was very territorial. It came sort of almost, not quite dive bombing me, but sort of coming at me a little while. So I just sort of stayed away and decided not to try to find the nest. One of the cool parts of, now I've explained the snag forest, so that what's happening in the snag forest in one of the earliest slides that I showed is a lot of conifer growth, a lot of understory vegetation coming up. The oaks have this perfect ring or around the root sprouts coming out like in a ring around the mother tree. And this tends, and also chaparral growing, this tends to attract a huge number of a wave of chaparral nesting birds, ground nesting birds. And this green-tailed towhee is definitely nesting somewhere in there. This is Inyo National Forest, but it's actually an aspen burn. Very unusual colors there. And of course, Western tanagers are definitely, they are one of, Richard Hutto, some of you, if you're familiar with his name, he started a lot of these incredible post-fire studies right after the Yellowstone fire. And he found there were just scores and scores of what he termed firebirds, and the tanager and the crossbill are among them. And I've routinely found all of his firebirds in the California post-fire forests. So one thing that hasn't been mentioned so much is great gray owl. Now you can see these in terms of firebird lists, but I found 3 different nests of great gray owl bordering meadows in burn areas. This is rimfire again, really close to Yosemite. And of course, we know that great gray owls are doing pretty well in Yosemite. What's really interesting is, of course, as the young get populated and they try to seek out their own territory, they'll go into areas closer to, Stanislaus National Forest or other areas that are on the outskirts outside of Yosemite. And a pair of great grays had 2 chicks in a huge cedar snag. It was like a queen-sized bed in girth at the base, and then it tapered off to the top. It looks like this crown of thorns, branches, and this really complex array afforded this beautiful area to disguise themselves and nest in, which was to me an amazing surprise. That's the female. And she's hunting, and you can see where she's hunting, right there on the edge of the snag forest in one of the charcoal trees, and dive bombing a mouse that she will later pick up and take back to the nest, and the chick will drop it. So kind of followed that one closely. Another, I just wanted to say about the great grays and then also the spotteds, that there's 2 separate studies that talk about how amazing it is that they come right back after fire, and there they are. Then great grays, I've seen them nesting right in a snag, but spotteds, more often than not, they'll be in a really dense canopy, closed canopy that burned with low intensity. The fire went up, about a foot or 2, maybe 3 high into the trees, but it didn't burn off the canopy. So they have all that canopy cover, and you can see their hiding spot preference is much. It's just pretty different. Here's a surprise. Now I haven't even seen a single study about goshawks in a burn forest, and I've seen 3 different nests of goshawks in post-fire forests. This one, I thought she was young. I don't know. I can't judge, but I thought she was a young mother because she just seemed to be constantly begging her mate for food. They had this special guttural call. I've never seen it record. If anyone knows of that guttural call, they call to their mate, and the mate calls back when the mate's got food for her at a plucking post, and she'll leave the nest just for a little while. Please let me know if you've seen that, if you've heard the call recorded, but it's a very low tone call that, and she was using it a lot. And she's got 3 chicks in there, and And I kept coming back to this place. What I would do with goshawks are, I'm sure a lot of animals are pretty sensitive. I do this with a lot of the birds. I would just basically camp out in a blind, starting at about 3 a.m. with a friend, and wait for the light. And then once the light comes in, like this much light, I start filming. And there is, I think this is footage. I'm going to try this. I can just talk and you can see us whispering. There's 3 little chicks, and the sun's just come up. They're moving around. Serena, can you see them moving?
Yes, we can see them.
Can you see the footage?
Yeah.
The other nest had 4 successfully fledged. I just have, this is footage, so I spent a little time there. So this is several weeks after I watched that female in that first shot. I just kept coming back to sort of watch the chicks progress, and they were not fighting with each other too much. To me, that's an indication they're being fed really well, but they were, they were sort of jostling back and forth, but no one pushed the other one off the nest. They all did fine. Oh, there's all 3 of them. So I'm going to transition to mammals real quick because I know we're wanted to talk a little bit about this. I mentioned fishers using pileated woodpecker cavities, which to me it's fascinating that the longevity of use for a nest. It starts out real simple with one bird and another smaller mammal, and then something that can dig like this Pacific fisher, which is actually listed. It's endangered in Southern Cal, and it's endangered in this area, rimfire, was digging into a fallen snag. It was a log for grubs. So, and there was a lot of squirrels around, so I know they eat squirrels as well. But this is kind of interesting to me that they had that ability, and because there's documentation of them actually seeking out high cavities, nests in that pileates have used, I can imagine them sort of digging them out to be shaped according to how they like them, which is sort of fascinating to me because it seems like a large animal to be using a woodpecker cavity. It's, about the size of a really big cat. Of course, I've been noting a lot of mountain lion activities. One time it was right outside my tent. But yeah, I mean, I was just basically located, I would pretty much camp in the same watershed where a lot of the documentations are happening. And these are all cameras that I've left in place. I'm not filming the animals actively. You can see this is a night shot. So it'll record day and night, anything that moves around. This looks like a pretty mature mountain lion. And this buck is foraging on the chaparral habitat and slipped off and wasn't phased at all. Just a few minutes later, he just like fell off the log. It was full of snow. So really recently, I've started documenting wildlife post-fire in the Dixie Fire, which some of you know is almost 1 million acres, 2021, sorry. And it did turn a lot of forests. It was pretty high intensity, although it hasn't been a full year, so you can't really say if there are surviving trees. The percentages might go up, and that might they might end up being moderate intensity fire areas. But this is a snag that fell. So it's sort of a log. I like to call them nurse logs because this little ringtail cat was using it all the time, and then a squirrel was using it by day. So this was sort of a nice sort of a viewing point, foraging area. It was munching on the pine needles even, and the meat at the base, and then going in and out between these 2 snags, just sort of hiding in them. So I think about this as habit in terms of the value of habitat. It's just amazing to me. One thing about the Dixie, I wonder if I have more slides of Dixie. this isn't Dixie, but I've seen a lot of foxes in the Dixie. This is a pair of foxes, and this is a very sweet pair that did this funny little, I've just never seen foxes do that. They would circle each other and do a little, I would imagine, possibly courtship dance. And here they're just sort of enjoying themselves on, you could see that this is a little viewing post for them. I imagine that that's sort of useful when you're the size of a fox. And Dixie Fire wanted to mention a little bit too, some of the areas that were really thinned, like thinned out for like treatment units so that they would be protecting, the trees would be protected during fire, actually burned really hot. And a colleague of mine, Bryant Baker from Los Padres Forest Watch, has been mapping a lot of the big fires. He mapped Dixie, he mapped the Caldor up in Tahoe, and he's seen this trend of some areas where the forests are thinned actually have been burning really quickly, and with, it looks like high severity, still to be determined. Here's the same fox, a little bit of a close-up. That's a long-tailed weasel, night shot, pretty distant, so it's not, so you can see, again, this is a different snag forest. It's called Crocker Ridge, if anyone's heard. It'll be south of 120 on your way to Yosemite. Same area, Crocker Ridge, nice big bobcat. And now I'm coming home, a little closer to home. This is a friend whose private land, she wanted to, she was really interested in having me investigate the return of wildlife to her land. And there's a young bobcat here, and there's a very big, what looks like a big male bobcat as well on her land, as well as a lot of other wildlife and a ton of foxes. And you can see that backdrop and the horsetails coming back. That's a really, really little bear, believe it or not. It's when he finally walked off, this is footage. I just thought, oh my gosh, I hope his mom is nearby. So, and that's Mama Bear and the baby. And you can see how, you know, she actually was peeling off the bark to forage underneath the bark. So obviously, you know, again, using the existing resources as the forest sort of, the post-fire forest sort of degrades and goes back to soil, and there's a lot of grubs. So yeah, I wanted to give a shout out for regeneration in snag forests. This is the top photo is the very, let's say 2 years after post-fire, and you can see a snag in the backdrop. And then the lower photo is 5 years after fire. And right now, and those trees are like not as tall as I am, I'm 5'7". Right now, they're like 8, 9, 10 feet tall. And all this is all natural regeneration. No one came in here to do restoration work. It's all done by nature and the availability of light. So yeah, this little, sadly, this is one of the only pictures I have of one of the snag forests that sort of got taken out. And a little gray fox here, again, Stanislaw. And so I just really wonder, I mean, it seems like this one is pretty young. I know this because I was watching a lot of foxes in going through my cams, and this one was much more hesitant. You know, he would sniff around and then just sit there and look around, and very sweet. I just sort of wonder what would happen, what happens to the younger animals when the habitat is sort of cleared. I think it's sort of a perception that, you know, this is not of any value, and it's something we could change in ourselves, as well as, you know, sort of talk to others about. I just wanted to give you one little glimpse of an intact forest that was thinned as part of a thinning project, and this sometimes happens, sometimes not, but it's variable. But it was actively thinned, you know, for it to be restored, and not to suffer, I mean, like to not really be hammered by fire. But indeed, if, as you can see, it's the same picture, the thinning actually burnt, that area burned pretty high severity, and then it turned into a commercial clear cut. So there you go with that perception of, you know, like areas that are thinned, will they always fare well? Sometimes not. And so there's just so much variability out there. So yeah, so just wanted to give you like sort of not a time lapse, but a sequence of what has sometimes happened. And that's me in one of the areas where I've been studying. So beautiful habitat. Yeah, so what I wanted to do was just to close out, because, you know, when it's sort of funny, you like end up zooming into these slides and then, you know, the person gets small and we're just not even live anymore. If I was showing slides and I would be dancing around and, you know, it would be all live and stuff. So, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the biodiversity, because I haven't actually shown, you know, a ton of species, primarily because I pretty much focus in on a few possibly listed or species that are not doing too well. The trends are that they're sort of in the decline. And so, and more behavior than a life list person. But I have to tell you that I have documented over 90 species of birds in post-fire forests. And a vast majority of them, actually every single one of the birds, uses the snag forests. Like, for example, that goshawk that I showed you with the 3 chicks, she's in a live tree, and there's a snag, there's snags around her, but just 200 feet downhill from her is a full standing snag. I mean, like, it's like mostly snags, standing dead trees, charcoal trees, where she goes and hunts every day. So it's like so convenient. She's got the bed and she's got the breakfast, which is what some ecologists call it. It's the bed and breakfast concept. The bed is, you know, sort of more in this lower intensity burn area where most of the trees are alive and you got all the cover you like and the shade for the chicks. And then the breakfast, of course, is going to be out in the snag forest where she can clearly see anything below her and then swoop down on it. And she brings back mostly actually birds, and she plucks them somewhere else and then brings them over. So I've seen this over and over again, and the raptors seem to do really, really well because they're close by to a source of a lot of food and a lot of easy to watch food. So so I'm not including raptors as nesting actively in the stands of charcoal trees, but they depend on it. And then of the 90 birds, I would say, you know, maybe 70 nesting in the snag forest. And the reason is, as the chaparral rises and starts becoming more and more dense, that's the, you know, that's the stuff. That's the real home. That's the bang for the buck in terms of it's got the hiding place, it's got the insects. So a lot of like the evening grosbeak, the tanager, well, no, that tanager nests higher in the tree, but the evening grosbeak, the green-tailed towhee, the spotted towhees, and a lot of different birds, a lot of warblers will go down into close to the ground and nest there. I've actually noticed a lot of McGilvery's warblers. They're very shy. And when birds start acting where they're really kind of really behaving differently, I try to not be there. So it's a lot is dependent on my documentation. A lot is dependent on, can I tuck a little blind somewhere close by where the birds are going to just sort of behave normally, rather than, you know, like be all aware of the fact that there's a strange shape or a strange person out there. So anyway, I just wanted to, even though I didn't share the 90, there's certainly well over 90 birds. So thank you Annie so much, and I'm glad I had that moment to sort of be after the slides are over and just talk to you a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really lovely to see all that biodiversity coming back after these fires. Just gorgeous. And we do have lots of questions, so I am happy to read some out to you. So I know that some people were curious about what was happening before the fires, right? So what was nesting there? What happened during the fires to those nests? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the birds, and the animals do what they always do. They'll seek out an area that feels safe to them, away from where there's a lot of activity, not as open, maybe, where there'll be predators and away from predators and a chance to hide, and where there's food available. So, for example, like Inyo National Forest, I did study. It was an unburned forest, because like it was trying to like look at burn and unburn and compare and stuff. And it's unburned, and there's some little patches of really old burns as well. But mostly I was in the unburned, where you saw that blackback woodpecker that was like black, iridescent black on a bright gold tree, and that was a nest failure. But so they do okay. And they just sort of wait it out. In terms of the woodpeckers, I think the others tend to be really, the others tend to be really, they do okay, I think, but at the same time, I have a feeling that because of the numbers, the high numbers, one time in Lassen, I was like measuring distances between nests. Every 700 meters, there was another blackback nest. I mean, they're territorial woodpeckers. So for them to be that close by, that means there's enough food, there's enough resources. And so they all go in, they get attracted into these burn areas. But I'm sure they're in the forests, and they'll piecemeal it and find their way, without the burn.
Hey, thanks for that answer. So one person asked, is anyone studying the effect of burning wood piles after forest fires on habitats? Theoretically, people might do that to lower future fire danger. Is anyone studying that? Do you know anything about that?
I don't know. That's such an interesting question. I mean, I think if it's someone who's wanting to burn a wood pile, close to home, obviously, as a lot of you probably know, Jack Cohen and Alexander Seifert have done some of the classic studies on home safety with, 100 feet around the home. It is actually a great idea to do those burn piles. Out in the forest, I mean, given the fact that forests are supposed to do their thing and go through their cycles, burning a wood pile is probably a bit destructive, I might venture to say, because I have seen wood piles where it toasts the soil to almost silica, and you have a ring. This is a big fire ring, the shape of, it was the fire, the logs, shaped like a pyramid and burned in the winter or something, and it just kept smoldering for a long time, and then that soil got sterilized. And that is actually where I have seen lack of regeneration after it. So I can also, it's a carbon problem. I mean, think really when you think about fires and fire frequency and what's going on with fires right now, I mean, it is a climate change issue, and putting less carbon in the air is probably a great idea. And I'm sure some of you have seen these nurse logs, like the way logs just sort of that collapse in, and within the seasons they're crumbling even if they're dry. The other day I was on a survey, and I wanted to step over a barbed wire fence, and I thought, oh, this looks like a solid log. Boom! I went right in, crashed through the log. It was decomposing. Even though conditions are dry, and there's a wet cycle, and it's just slowly sort of melts into the soil. So I just think the leave it alone strategy is really great, because it's just such great habitat,
Yeah, and somewhat related in some ways, Robin asked, are standing dead snags considered a fire hazard from a fuel load standpoint?
Well, they burned already. And the biggest study that I've seen, and this is not so much burn snags, but beetles get into snags, and then there's those sort of stands of snags, but they're not burned. They're beetle kill snags. A similar thing happens, you know, flush of diversity, a lot of woodpeckers, et cetera, a lot of food for the animals. So Sarah Hart et al. And her colleagues did a 12-year study on do the beetle kill the snags, right? I mean, I don't know if they were burned or beetle kill or both, but she studied that for 12 years. Do they burn more readily than the unburned forest? What's the answer? No, they don't. They don't burn more readily. 12 years of data, and it was millions of acres, millions of acres. She took the entire swath of the American West. She didn't just take one state. And this was Forest Service data. So yeah, I mean, the idea, you know, here it is. Aesthetics. It looks like it's gonna crash, it's gonna burn, it's gonna, you know, that was my first feeling when I stepped into a post-fire. I was like, what the heck am I doing here? You know, why am I here? You know, and then it sort of started speaking for itself. You know, you just had to wait. And it was amazing to me that it's really life coming back. It's the reset button. It's the rebirth. It's the, I'm not dead yet. Wait a minute. There's going to be more. Hold on, there's going to be more. So it's really our gut instinct to say, you know, and it was mine. I have to confess, it was totally mine. And so, no, they don't burn more readily. No, they're not a fire hazard any more than the rest of the forest is. Within, you know, a few years, there'll be a lot more growth, and that may burn. I mean, fires go through in cycles, and that's just how it works. I think one of the things I have noticed is when you come into a patch that's been partially cleared, like, you know, it's not been clear cut. It's just that there's these snags, live trees with spaces in between them. It's just been manicured. It's a manicured forest, right? That can burn with high severity. That I have seen. Like I've seen, and Dixie Fire, which is what I'm studying right now, I'm seeing that. They get toasted. And so this idea that thinning is going to help, it's not always the case. Long answer, sorry.
Yeah, that was great, thanks. And then Doug had asked about when you were talking about firebirds, so Western tanagers, right, moving into the forest to breed. Were they previously nesting there as well before the fire?
I'm sure they were. Because tanagers nest high in the trees. For some reason, maybe they, you know, like for some reason, again, it's really for an animal, I would imagine, you know, it's for us, right? Like for us, it's like I move for a job, you know, for bread and butter, for, you know, a good home, etc., right? Then I'm in a place which is suiting me, lots of friends, community, etc. I think with animals, it's pretty similar. There's family, there's food, there's shelter, and all of a sudden, after a burnt forest, there's this clean slate. No one else is there. I'm going to go there because there's real estate and there's shopping, you know, to be done, you know, easy shopping. So that's what I'm sensing when I see this busy, thriving, bustling, you know, forest that is the intact snag forest.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And Susan asked, how soon after fires do all these animals start moving back in?
Oh, you know, that's a really good question. I actually should have talked about that way back with the first woodpecker slide. I'm imagining it happens in waves. I've seen blackbacks a few months after fire or almost immediately after. I mean, I'm sure it varies, but first it's the insects that come in, the wood boring beetles that come in, and then they lay their eggs on the snags, on the standing dead trees. And the larvae just bore into their wood boring. So they bore deep into the wood, and that's what the blackbacks, and I've seen haries are after, both of them. So and a lot of the, and then there's bark beetle larvae too that'll be in there. So I would say that's the first wave of life, but I'm not 100% because that's a really good sequence to document. That would be a great study after fire if there's intact, where reliably the forest is going to remain intact and it won't be cleared. So that first wave, then the birds come in, and these are small birds, right? You've got blackback, hairy. And then the bluebirds will come in probably in tandem because they know the blackbacks are going to be, making a few extra nests and they won't be used. And so boom, they'll have homes. So the bluebirds and nuthatches, the ground squirrel meanwhile come in. And then once the chaparral comes up, which would be 3 years post-fire, 4 years post-fire, that's going to be all those ground nesters and the chaparral nesters, the towhees and the grosbeaks and the warblers, they'll all come in. So it's going to be wave upon wave. Now you've got quite a lot of activity, and you'll see the goss and you'll see the owls, and all the bigger animals are going to start coming in because there's a lot going on over here, that kind of thing. So it's I would sense that it's wave upon wave. But having said that, the spotteds and the great grays were there before the fire. They were gone, and then they came back 1 to 2 years post-fire, and that's a study. 2 years post-fire. There's one study by Monica Bond from 2015 on all those spotted owls that came back, and then there's another study by Siegel on the great gray owls that came back. So it's kind of interesting, and it was not immediate. It was maybe a couple of years after.
A lot of good information there. And Wendy asked, what kinds of techniques are you using to make your observations? So besides leaving cameras on, how do you find these species to begin with? Does it take hours or days of observations over a big area to even find them, or are they pretty easy to find?
Well, with the birds, okay, so with blackback woodpecker, Victoria Saab has a protocol, which is like calling blackbacks with a caller, and then blackbacks are a small bird with a big personality. That's how I look at blackbacks, and that's also another friend's description. They'll come zooming in and they'll hide behind a tree and look at you and go, and they'll just check you out, and then they'll fly back. So if they're not flying too fast, and if their nest is somewhere close by, you can actually walk right over to the nest. And the little ones, if they've hatched out, they have a very sort of cicada-like call for the first couple of weeks, and then they transition to the chipping, which is really loud. Chick, 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 chick. So there's two different, they're born with a different call, and then they or hatch out with a different call, and then they start. So if you hear a tree with a lot of cicadas in it, that's probably blackback woodpeckers that have just been hatched, right? So so that's one way, and that takes, it can sometimes take a few days, a week, 2 weeks. But the fisher, I have been literally putting cameras out for 2 years, and they're so hard to find, so secretive. So that fisher shot that I showed you was a result of 2 years of work. And camera surveys for me are, I'm not doing quantitative. I'm just checking it out. So it could be a study. I would love to make it a study if I had the time, etc. But right now, it's just really the urgency of documenting something that people are just not familiar with so much. They're like, what? They're in there? Like the fisher, it looked like a lot of green. You had a creek close by. You could see horsetails and a lot of vegetation. Well, right up the hill from the fisher is a big snag patch. And they live in snags. We know that. So the chances are he was making a living somewhere up there.
Well, and then Gina asked about what you mean by clear cutting to support biomass energy operations. If you want to clarify.
Oh, someone saw that and I forgot even to mention it. I was going to, but I was sort of racing through. Yeah, so like this is a new trend, it's unfortunate, in California, which is that, so if the cutting is done for lumber, if the cutting is done within a year or two and it's like quality that's lumber, like used for lumber, then most of it goes into the mills. well, if it's not done within 2 years, if it's done year 6, 7, whatever, then it goes to a facility called a biomass energy plant that's like a coal plant, and it's just basically burning up the trees for energy. Now, you'll find a lot about that in Center for Biological Diversity's. They've got a little briefing book, or a sort of little information packet on it, and it's really inefficient. So it is a big game changer. So we need to, I feel, I'm glad someone asked the question, but I do feel like that is something that is sort of a no-no. You can't be running out of coal or whatever else is happening and then just say, well, now that the coal's out of fashion, I'm just going to throw in a different fuel instead of a fossil fuel, because wood burns much more dirty. In fact, it's 1.5 times more dirty. Now, what I'm saying is that it takes, because wood is less dense and more in an oxidized state, coal is like really dense. So it'll take 1.5 times or more the amount of wood to create the same amount of energy that the equivalent amount of coal. So you're really wasting a lot more wood than you would be coal by weight for the power generated. So it's sort of, in my view, that's pretty unfortunate.
Yeah, definitely. And then kind of along, related in some ways, right? Talking about thinned forests here. Why might a thinned forest have a higher fire severity than one that hasn't been thinned?
Yeah, so it seems sort of weird that, okay, that's a fuels reduction. And so what happened? Like it was reduced, it was all slim and trim, and then why did the fire whip through it? And my guess is, and I've seen this, is that if you're doing 100 feet around your home and irrigating and thinning the trees and limbing it, and then you see a branch that sort of leans on your roof, oh, better get that one, etc. It's a lot of maintenance, and you're doing that regularly. Well, if it's out in the forest and someone does this thinning operation, no one's maintaining it. No one's going to be mowing grasses and watering this, and oh, that thing fell. And so there's dry stuff, there's growth of grasses, there's stuff that comes up, and there's just the very complexity of nature. So even if it's a thin forest, it's not a manicured area like around your home. And so, but everything else burns too, and everything else burns quickly. Like I've filmed the 2017 fires very close to my home, on the other side of the hill, closer to Napa, Sonoma Valley, actually. And it was coming down, the fire was coming down a grassland. It was literally like a river. So fire's going to move really fast. I filmed it, I stayed as long as I could. And then I thought, this road's going to be closed soon. So I just sort of left. And it's not just trees that are burning, it's grass, it's chaparral, it's everything. So, and grass can make embers fly, so does chaparral, and the embers are normally flying ahead of the fire front. So this whole idea that trees are the only things that will torch up, that's absolutely not the case. And also the land's all dried out when it's not your irrigated lawn when you've done your little defensible space. It's just out there, and so it's dried out, it's crispy, and it's ready to burn. And so the fire is, if you look at I can send you Brad Baker's maps, and if you match it up with fire progression data, like the day the fire went really fast, the day the fire went really fast, the day the fire started creeping really slow, you will see forest to forest, a lot of the areas where the fires went really fast worth it. Just whipped right through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then also talking about clear cutting again, David asked, after clear cutting succession, does succession take a completely different form with different species? Is it a slower process if it has already been clear cut?
Yes. Really excellent question. In fact, yes. So, it's so funny. Well, it's not actually. It's horribly sad, but I'm saying funny in the sense that, so obvious that I'm driving down this little forest road off of Evergreen Road, and on one side they've done a small clear cut, and on the other side they haven't. And wow, that one, the trees are the little baby trees that are growing, they're not coming back, and they replanted and replanted, and they're not coming back. Sometimes they do, you know, depending on how close they are to a creek, water, soil, etc. The ones that are on their own, that's just they're collaborating with mycorrhizal fungi. They're doing their own thing. There's an intermix of chaparral, and the little trees, baby trees, got a little bit of shade, or some log fell and it's sort of growing up under it, you know, like, and then eventually will straighten up. I've seen all that because they can't have it way too dry and way too hot either. And so there's a scorch factor when it's all taken out. And of course, the soil disturbance by heavy machinery, yeah, it doesn't grow as well, for sure. I mean, quantifying it's going to be a little hard, but I'm sure it's possible. I think that's a really good study.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in that. Wendy asked if you've ever thought of trying to capture footage of birds dispersing burning branches during a fire.
Oh, wow. That would be, well, of course we have to evacuate, right? So that's, you know, I would imagine it's all about timing, right? If a little fledgling, well, if a fledgling has just made it out and can fly, it's going to be able to be gone. If it's in the nest and it can't fly yet, you know, that's just not going to, it's not going to be able to disperse, right? I'm sure that happens, you know, I'm sure that happens with fires. If it's in that stage, it depends on the stage when the fire comes in. But if it's June and the nesting season, April, May, June, right? And by July, things are pretty much done. Then, and, you know, fire season tends to, like some of the big fires were August, July, August. Rimfire was August. Dixie went into September, I think, or October. So I would think that, in fact, yeah, I was in Dixie at the beginning of October, and there was still smoldering. Little Snags was still smoldering, driving through it. And there wasn't really much life to see there, but I did immediately hear a pileated woodpecker creating his home. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, I think that would be very difficult.
Yeah, I think Wendy might have been referring to observations, I think in like Australia, where raptors seem to be carrying burning sticks, right, to other spots, potentially to, you know, drop the burning stick and cause more fire and stuff like that. But I don't know if anything like that has ever been observed here, where raptors might be carrying burning branches and things like that.
I never have I heard about that, not once. So, I mean, boy, you know, with observations, you know, once, twice, you just feel like, how can you interpret that? If it happens 50 or 60 times, then you can sort of, you know, have enough observations to create some kind of, you know, results out of it. I wouldn't know how to deal with just one observation, you know?
Yeah. Okay. And then Tom had asked, you know, based on your experience, what would you do with the forest then? Thin it, leave it, other. After a forest burns, what would you do? And it sounds like, you know, letting it regenerate itself, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it depends. Like, say, okay, let's say it was a plantation in its previous life, right? And then it burned, and then it really torched, because that's what's happening with plantation style forestry. Is it's, you know, it's these trees in rows, and they're all even age, and they're all little, you know, they're not mature, so boom. So in that particular situation, yeah, I'm sure there's some treatment that you could impose on the land, and, you know, sort of mulching and letting it go to decompose a little faster into the soil, and planting, etc., and that kind of restoration action. I'm sure there's a place for it. In fact, there's a lot of places for it, because there's a lot of plantations and they're burning. But in the intact post-fire forests, they're an invitation card to life. That's what they are. Like they're like a little RSVP. Can you please show up to my party? Because I'll be able to support you for 10, 15 years. Yeah, I mean, it's a different thing. I mean, it's not quite that, but it really is supporting so much life that I cannot see it as anything other than just sort of a smoke-filled, the smoke is the vehicle for calling, the waves of species in, and then others follow, so I can only say, having seen 90 plus birds species, not birds, but species in post-fire forests, especially using the snag forest, I would say we just, at the very least, for experiment, for biodiversity, for saving some carbon, we really have to leave some intact snag forests behind for our own heritage, for young people to experience, the millions and millions of years old traditions that forests have of rejuvenating themselves,
Yeah, definitely. That was lovely, beautifully put. We also had Karen asked if there's time, if you'd like to read one of your short poems. We would love to hear that too.
Oh yeah, I don't know why I didn't even think of poems. Gosh, and I do have I didn't even think of that.
Well,
Thank you for
yeah, I can look for more questions too while you look for one.
Yeah, in fact, I can answer them while I look for one.
Great. Let's see. So another question that came up is, there are some areas where you have so many fires. Tanisha said that she's in San Diego. There are so many fires in Southern California. Mm-hmm. What animals do you think might be most impact because they might not be as able to easily relocate because of the region?
Yeah, I have to say one thing that I did not mention yet is that Southern Cal has, it's primarily human ignitions, I mean, I'm sure you have examples. I have several in my head, but there's a lot of human ignitions related to fires in Southern Cal and certainly Northern Cal too. They say 80% or over 80% of the fires are caused by humans. And Southern Cal is burning so often. Chaparral is not built it can regenerate, but as it's regenerating, if it's burning again, it fails to regenerate anymore. And then it just is a bunch of grasslands. And the beautiful chaparral habitat characteristic of Southern Cal is going to go away if fire is hitting it too hard and too much. And I'm really hoping that doesn't happen, more and more, and that some chaparral is saved, because so much, like going back to the time of the grizzlies, everything depended on that chaparral habitat, and the oaks too, the live oaks, etc. So I just that's a word of caution right there, is that too often and too much is not good, and especially human ignition related. Yeah. So I'm going to read rejuvenation. Let's see. Oh, I'll read rejuvenation. Rejuvenation. Once we have looked away, once we have mourned and banished all smoldering thoughts about the tribe of blackened trees, replacing the known world for now and another season. And the last long fingers of smoke have been ushered out by wind. A ticking begins. No one has seen them arriving in such numbers. But the birds are neither lost nor passing through. They are simply linked tight to the newborn sense of ash and rain, to the promise of white fruits, the riches concealed by bark. So were the ways of ancestors who began their journeys as specks in the distance, some 50,000 years ago or more, riding the miles of smoky gold, growing closer and closer, the rufous beat of instinct, working a migration into the flow of smoke, into the source and its multiple treasures. One new arrival looks bright with hope. He preens his dusk and opal plumage. Others tap as if knocking on doors. The answers have been provided by the ages, long as genetic fibers coiled in every cell, beak and bone, muscle and shiny eye. The living are awake to the growth and profusion soon to follow. They will grow with the diligence of all known colors unfurling, from the soil's chocolatey darkness, from the trees regreening comes spring, from the blackness.
That was lovely. Thank you so much, Maya, for sharing. That was a lot of fun to see all of your photos, and it was inspiring too to see, you know, how you're inspired by the rejuvenation after these fires. It's amazing. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. And Maya, is there anything else you want to share before we sign off?
If you want a few secret snag forests and you want to get out there and visit them, there's nothing like it. Let me know. I can actually put a few of the locations down, you know, in my notes too.
Yeah, great. I will be sending out the, everything that you mentioned to everybody who registered. Thank you again so much. It was really lovely to have you.
Thanks, Serena. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you all.